Welcome back. We're now on our third major prophet. This is video number 4. Just a little behind the scenes, I have learned some more things about the technology that I'm using, and that basically in order to record or screen capture, I lose a lot of my transition elements, or my animation. So hopefully I know when to click the next slide, and so if the slides look like they're slightly off, that's because I'm trying to do this on the fly, where I'm reading my notes and looking at the slide at the same time. So if you ever wonder, that's why. So back to the subject at hand. We are on the third major prophet. Each week we do say that we're reading the hardest prophet to understand, and once again I believe that this is the case. Now, in my own opinion, I will say that Ezekiel is the hardest, and it's his writings that has caused more debates than any other book in the Bible. His language itself is not necessarily difficult, but really it's what he is saying, or the concepts that he's bringing up. So I'm going to do my best to just give a broad view instead of focus on the details. My intention is not to kind of have us clearly identify what camp or what denominational camp or what eschatological camp you fall into, because that's not the purpose of this study. It's so that you can read and understand. And I will acknowledge that after reading Ezekiel 3 or 4 times, you're probably still going to misunderstand some stuff. And that's just the nature of Ezekiel. We will know when we know, but we're not his original audience, and so it makes it a lot more difficult. All right. As we move in, we always talk about our little class dues. I bring that up. The thing I always want to remind you in this video is that these were all made from a college course. Recognize that my college course background has some presuppositions, but I try to remove that and put it into this course as free and easy, so that it's almost universal, or historically we could say Catholic. We're not saying Roman Catholic, but we're using Catholic in the term that is universal. So anyone can really listen to this and come out as any denomination, and I think we all can agree that, yep, that is exactly what Ezekiel is saying. Before, just because this is what I did for the students, just if you want, before, to free your mind a little bit, you can ask yourself, which would you rather have, your coffee always hot or your coffee always iced? Now, if you're in the South, you're probably always thinking iced. If you're in New England, it doesn't matter whether it's hot or cold, you're always iced. Me, I'm always a hot guy. And then as I tell the students, hey, you shouldn't be drinking coffee, at least not at your age. At least think about other things like drink tea. But that's not the point. So we have our refreshers, and I'll go over this every week, and I did, which is we need to understand 3 simple questions. And if we can't answer these 3 simple questions, we may find ourselves misinterpreting text. And it's real simple. It's like, when did the prophets exist related to the exile? Are they pre-exile, post-exile, or during the exile? Who are they prophesying to? Is it Israel, Judah, Edom, or Nineveh? And then what is foretelling and what is foretelling? Now, a couple of things when we're talking about the simplicity of the text, or another way to put it. If you get to the point where you can't answer all of these, it's okay to Google search. It's okay to come out and figure out and go, hey, can you answer this for me? Now, the one part about question 3 is when we're talking about foretelling and foretelling, you don't really necessarily need to know, is it within the categories of immediate, near, far, or near far, which is the already, not yet. You just need to know whether he's addressing the present speakers, the present audience, or if he's talking to a future audience. And for Ezekiel, it's very important because it's easy to miss. All right, so who is Ezekiel? We've been talking about the prophets as priests, or on the path to being priests. And while not all writing prophets are priests, like Jeremiah is too young, Ezekiel is a priest, and he has been training to be one for years. When we read that, we should see how he is more focused on what we call priestly things than others. So while the other ones looked at Deuteronomy, like Isaiah and Jeremiah looked a lot on Deuteronomy, you'll find that Ezekiel has a lot more elements of Leviticus, as well as Deuteronomy. And so what we will notice is that he begins his ministry on his 30th birthday, and is the day when he is supposed to begin his profession. He sees that his life had been built up to this moment, and then now, after spending a lifetime preparing for it, he cannot do what he was being trained for because he's in captivity. So as a priest, he is not expected to just speak the right things, but that he is to model and perform everything to God's perfection. And as a prophet, this will be the same thing. The way he will prophesy is mostly through action or acting. He will perform the messages, and this is why he is known as the acting prophet. So the book of Ezekiel actually begins before the first words. Ezekiel begins on the river Chebar, which is in Babylon. And this means that Ezekiel occurs during the exile. But his message will also be pre-exile because the people are taken in waves. During the first wave, Daniel is taken. The second wave, which is in 596 BC, Ezekiel and 10,000 others will be taken captive. The first wave of captives were taken when Babylon went to war with Egypt and Assyria. In this second wave, Babylon has been raised up to fight Jerusalem. Jeremiah tells the kings that this will happen and that it is in their best interest to surrender. The king Jehoiachin will surrender at this time, and it looks like Ezekiel too. So we shouldn't think of this period of captivity like how we envision war, with prison camps and forced labor. We don't really know what life was like for these Jews, because we assume the worst based on how Babylon is depicted. But we also know that by the time of Ezekiel, Daniel has influence on the king of Babylon, and he has had this for several years, possibly even a decade. So Ezekiel mentions Daniel in his writings and states that he is one of the wisest to be known. Therefore, life for the Jews is fairly improved fairly more improved than it could have been if they were just regular captives. Now, Ezekiel and Jeremiah are called contemporaries, as they are talking to the same people during the same time. The difference is that Jeremiah is speaking to the Jews from Jerusalem, while Ezekiel is speaking to the Jews from Babylon. We should expect a lot of parallels. The big picture is that even though two exiles have already occurred, right, we talked about Daniel being taken and then Ezekiel being taken, the final blow has not happened yet. And so Ezekiel's purpose is to remove this delusion and remind the people that their captivity will be long and Jerusalem will be destroyed. All right, so what is the big picture? Let me get my There we go. So what is the picture? So often the case with writing prophets is Ezekiel holds out hope for a restoration for all the exiles, a reunited people, a re-erected temple, a reorganized worship, and a regenerated Israel. Ezekiel's message here follows a threefold outline, and that's the fall of Jerusalem, the foes of Jerusalem, and the future of Jerusalem. Another way to say this is that there is a judgment for God's people, there is a judgment for God's enemies, and there is a restoration. It's really the pre-exile message again, right? You have broken the covenant, so repent. There's no repentance, then judgment on you and the nations, and yet there is still hope after judgment for glorious restoration. Now, as we have already stated, Ezekiel begins with him sitting alongside on the river on his 30th birthday. He laments that he is both in captivity and removed from ministry. But then he has an encounter where he is in the throne room of God. His description of the throne room is more than what Isaiah even describes, as Isaiah looks at himself while Ezekiel is very aware of what is around him. Here, Ezekiel is referred to as Son of Man or Son of Adam, which is a term to stress Ezekiel's humanity. This will be the first time out of 93 that he will be called Son of Man. In this encounter, he will be given a scroll to eat, which symbolizes that he is not speaking his words, but rather God's. And with these new words, chapter 4 through 7, then begins the prophecy about Jerusalem. Though the people think they will be returning home soon, Ezekiel will act out the message. Despite what people think, these weren't displays of a crazy person. They were intentional and performed intently. They were meant to grab the attention of the people. So he'll build a model of a city under siege using dolls. And then he'll lay on his side for almost a year. And he'll cook food over human poop and shave his beard and hair and destroy it. And each act will be interpreted in those chapters. He then falls into a vision of the temple, where Ezekiel will see all the sins that are actively occurring within the walls. But what we notice is that God is not just displaying random areas, but is moving from the inside out. And we note that God is leaving the temple itself. This means that when the temple is destroyed, God actually wasn't present. It will also set the stage where we won't see God enter the temple again until Jesus enters. Chapter 12 then has Ezekiel acting out the scene by packing up his bags and walking out of the city. The last portion of this section is to explain all of the charges. As Jeremiah received a lot of opposition, so will Ezekiel. While Jeremiah struggled with the opposition, Ezekiel stands firm and states that God will expose their whitewash in the incoming judgment. One of the important things to notice is how long these chapters of charges are. It exposes the fullness of their sins, and it illustrates how bad their actions have actually been. And as the chapter ends, God will take away Ezekiel's voice to serve as a sign. The next set of chapters deals with the judgment of the surrounding nations. It will sound parallel or similar to those of every other prophet, but it has little details that explain what each nation did. What you need to see is that the more writings devoted to a nation means that the nation is more powerful than others. More words means more power. Also, Ezekiel reminds us that there is what is known as hyperbole or hyperbolic speech. This means that the expression or terms sound greater than what will happen. Therefore, when we are judging the nations, we need to listen to all the prophets. Each prophet talks about the destruction of Egypt, for example, but Egypt still exists today. But if you read chapter 29, you'll see that God delivers Egypt. So Egypt is often prophesied to worship in the temple in the last days as well. And so this is probably good news for that country or that nation. Contrast this with chapters 26 through 29, which speaks of Tyre being completely destroyed. While half of Tyre will be destroyed, a lot of it is an island, and it had a powerful navy. And his navy will defend the island fortress against Babylon and will make Ezekiel actually look like a false prophet. That is until Alexander the Great, who is a Greek ruler, will fulfill this prophecy when he conquers them, building a bridge to the island where it's no longer an island and completely wiping them out. So this shows just the greatness of God there. And then the final chapters looks to the restoration of the people. And it begins with Ezekiel regaining the ability to speak. Now, theologically speaking, it focuses the concept of restoration through Judah and not to be confused with the nations. Chapter 34 then begins the introduction of restoration in the development of God as a shepherd who will rescue them from their current wicked shepherds. Like Jeremiah, Ezekiel will proclaim, quote, the covenant of peace, which we'll find is a parallel of the new covenant. This then goes into Ezekiel 37, which gives us this picture of the valley of dry bones. The point of this speaks to the current nature of the people, but how God will restore new life into them. Whether it speaks to Israel or Christians is another thing, but with the new life, there will be a future invasion by Gog and Magog, which is then stated again in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 8, where the entire world is poised to destroy Israel in a perfect coalition, meaning they all gain together. However, God intervenes and demonstrates his glory by protecting them and pours out his Spirit on them. Once again, we could argue back and forth about whether this has happened or not, but it seems to be a main sticking point for arguing about end times. But I think there's more of a bigger theological picture, which is really to show that God is in control and God has brought new life, and we shouldn't be really worried about what happens after that. So, lastly, the final 9 chapters has just a lot of descriptions. We'll notice that, and the descriptions are that of the temple. What we notice is that it's not describing Solomon's temple, which looks like this. It's more square. And it also doesn't look like what the future temple will be, which is known as Herod's temple, which is on the right. So instead, Ezekiel's temple is unique, and some will call it a heavenly temple. But there are altars and rooms that exist for sacrifice, which is not described about heaven. So some think that there will be even a third temple that was coming here, but it is described with the last days. And it has things like a river flowing out of the temple bringing life. So there's just a lot of debate, and there's a lot of descriptions. And so when we read all these descriptions, we're like, oh man, this is clearly going to be something future or actually happening. When there's probably something we're missing because we're not part of the original. I don't know. I have my thoughts, but I'm not wanting to put it here. So we go back to our theological structure. The most important phrases to gain from this comes from the phrase, "They shall know that I am the Lord," which appears 70 times. This phrase extends not just to Israel and Judah, but to the Gentile nations as well. God's message is not simply for the Israelites, but for the whole world. Ezekiel also depicts God as the glory cloud. We see the movement of God in Ezekiel's vision in the exact way that God moved through during the Exodus. God continues to lead people, and the glory cloud will return to the new temple in the restored land. And as we just mentioned, we are left trying to figure out where this new temple exists. If this temple is for this earth, what does that mean for the church? And if the temple is in heaven only, what does that mean when there are altars and animal preparation rooms? And then how come John doesn't see a temple in Revelation 21? So just like all the prophets, we need to know of its writings, but we don't really need to always be concerned or overly concerned about the details. So how do we read or other stuff we see? Right? Ezekiel gives us also the new covenant. He calls it the covenant of peace. But we see that both Jeremiah and Ezekiel are delivering the same message, yet separated by countries, and that's why we call it the echo of Jeremiah. It's like being screamed out through a valley, and so two people are hearing the same message. Ezekiel also mirrors Jeremiah by confirming that the Messiah will bring in this covenant of peace, and that the Messiah comes from the branch of David. Most importantly, the role of God will work differently, where he will take upon the role of the shepherd. The shepherd will care for his people to a greater level than how Israel had been doing so. And then finally, Ezekiel may be the Rosetta Stone for Revelation. Now, what is a Rosetta Stone? It's a stone that has writing from 3 languages on it, as we know how to... Let me see if I have a picture here. Sorry about that. Here we go. So this is the Rosetta Stone. As we know how to read Greek, we were able to translate 2 other languages by comparing the writings. Therefore, we could take Ezekiel and read it with Revelation to understand the text, such as things like the cherubim. We see that these living creatures who will be stationed at the entrance to the Garden of Eden will sit on top of the ark, who are found in the designs of the temple, and lastly, they exist in the visions of Revelation 4. Therefore, they seem to represent the presence of God as holy, powerful, eternal, and sovereign over all creation, who is worthy to be worshipped. Now, these creatures are not worshipped, but they themselves direct the worship to God. That's an example of how Ezekiel can be a Rosetta Stone. Lastly, how do we read Ezekiel? Right? Ezekiel is helpful in that we are given a lot of interpretations for his sign act of performances. As a Levitical priest, he doesn't speak in poetry. He tells it really like it is. But Ezekiel 38 and 39 have apocalyptic writing. It speaks of the nations of Gog and Magog, and everyone and their mother has attempted to define these nations, usually as Russia, China, and Iran, which seems very isolated, even when we really think about it. It feels like it's coming straight from a Western perspective. So that's not really what I think here. And Ezekiel is not just these 3 categories. We usually see the narration, the poetry, the apocalypse. Ezekiel actually has a little bit more. He has 5 other categories that we can break these things down. No other prophet speaks like this, and so we don't see this style of teaching until Jesus in the New Testament. So we have our Proverbs, which are general statements of wisdom. You'll find that in 12, 22, 23, 18, verse 2 and 3. We have our visions that are supernatural. And we said there's no poetry, but the visions kind of have that element to it. We have our parables. Parables are being stories that teach a lesson. And we have our strange acts, which are these dramas that he performs. And then lastly, we have our allegories, which are symbolisms that explore more complex themes. And this right here already is a reason why we can't just read the prophets literally each time. We have to search for the meaning within the appropriate genre. To read the Bible literally is to understand the words in the genre or the category that they exist in. All right. Lastly, if this was a lot, remember, read the text humbly. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask God for help and understanding. Ask for others to help you who you may know. Ask for books for guidance. And ask all three. And just be careful about getting stuck in one person's interpretation unless they are an extremely well-rounded individual, or if you just put absolute trust in them. But even then, I still, I pump the brakes there. It's never wrong to get a second opinion. And that will be it for Ezekiel. So thank you, and God bless.